So our sermon today, I've been talking already about strength and confidence, so it's no surprise that we're going in that direction, but before we go, I'll just gather our hearts in a moment of prayer before we begin. Creator God, we've heard the spoken word and we're listening for your word today, and we just ask that we can become part of your living word in the ways that the world needs, through Lent and always. Amen. So when I think of the word confidence, sometimes I think of the word superhero and the image of how, as little kids, we wanted to have this superhero strength and sometimes look like a Marvel comic kind of a character to take on the world. And so we'll talk about that during the reflection today, and we'll come back to the ways that we can strengthen up ourselves. And part of the reason that we've come up with this whole notion of building is shown on the next slide with a theme program that we're talking about with building. So the building will happen through Lent, and what we've got is the next slide shows a little picture of a program that we're working with, and it's called a family challenge, and it's based on the lectionary, so it's the parts of the story that lead us towards Easter and help us observe Lent. But it's intended for families, but I want us to think about it as intended for the whole church family, because even though it's meant for all ages essentially, and it's a way to help us focus on a theme for the week that will support our spiritual direction as we go through these weeks together. And so what we'll be doing each week is talking about a different word, and this week we've got a first brick to start with. So this one, you'll have to work with me here because you can't come after church and see it, but it says confidence. So we're going to put it on the ladder, and it's a way to help us remember what we're going to work on each week. And I know that typically Lent, we talk about how we're looking at the days lengthening and we're getting towards spring and looking for the lengthening days that we look forward to. And it's also to do with the French word lent, which is moving slowly. And I know in many traditions, Lent is a time to move slowly and to fast and give up and really focus on the spirit. And I know that often has to do with food, or it has to do with giving up a bad habit. But I think that a lot of us have given up a whole lot in the last year. And I know when I looked at the service from last year that this is right around the time that we had to stop having services because of where Lent fell last year. And while it might have seemed really fulfilling to give up something important last year like chocolate or maybe a curse word here and there, I feel like this year we've given up a lot. So I wanted us to focus on something more strengthening and less punishing, because it's been a punishing year, I think, for some of us in many ways. We've given up our certainty and our freedom and sometimes our jobs. And so we're trying to find ways to build back our confidence and get some hope right now. So that's my goal. So the next slide just shows a little reaffirmation of the notion. So love builds up is not a new theme. It's in the Bible elsewhere with what Kathy spoke about last week, with love being the foundation of so many parts of our lives. So we'll keep coming back to this in different ways throughout Lent, and hopefully it will give us a way to focus. So if anyone does want the package, I can send it to you, or you can just play along every week and listen for the new word and see how you want to focus on that. So our next slide shows a mountaintop moment. So we're looking at Matthew and how he's talking about Jesus being tempted in the wilderness. And the story cuts right to the chase of what it is to be human, because it's bringing into focus the struggles that we have in our lives and throughout Lent. Matthew has described Jesus as doing what he was supposed to do as a faithful Jewish man. He was fasting. That was important. But he becomes tempted in this time. Maybe he was delirious, or maybe something really did happen with a person. But there was a moment that he had during these 40 days of being away and being hungry and being by himself, that he became tempted to worship Satan. And he had to find strength to fight back against about that temptation, but he had to fight back against the personality that he was seeing there in Satan. And not once, but 3 times, he had to reject these temptations that kept being offered to him on a silver platter. So it's a way to show, the story shows that Jesus was following the Jewish law, but it's also a way to remind us that the job of this story was to show how he was being proven as God's chosen son. He's being asked in different ways, if you really are who you say you are, how about you prove it? Now, earlier in the chapter, he had an easier step because it was a big commitment, but he committed to God through a baptism. But everyone there was for him and with him and supporting him. And now it gets a lot tougher because now he's by himself and he's isolated, and now he has to maintain his strength and his faith when the temptations begin. So Satan comes to him and says, show your power and prove that you've got this magic touch we've heard about. And the next one is, okay, so prove that God believes in you. And the third one is a flat-out bribe. You can have all the earth and all its riches if you just turn away from God and focus on me. I've got everything you want. And so Jesus has to dig pretty deep. He has to refuse and reject all these temptations and maintain and not break his commitment to the goodness and to the God he had committed to earlier with his baptism. But he does this somehow. He finds the strength and he cements his values and shows what he stands for, because he won't be distracted and he won't be taken off course. So the next slide is a bit of a change. So this one is the superheroes. All the ways that superheroes are presented to us in the stories, in the comic books, and in the media. And when I think about superheroes and when I think about church, I think about a friend that we used to have in our family named Bill. And so my spouse, Brad, has done in the past some respite work. He's a developmental social worker, and he was at one time having this young man come and stay with us on certain weekends, and we'd go on outings together, and it gave him an outing and it gave his family a break. So Bill was born with cerebral palsy, which affected his physical abilities and also had an intellectual disability. So he was a man in age, but in some ways a child at heart. But he had so many awesome convictions, and we still keep in touch, even though he's moved away. So we had outings, we had sports and concerts, and sometimes I'd go to London's Comic-Con event, and he could meet his favorite characters. He loved rock stars, and he loved wrestlers, and he loved superheroes. And every trivia piece you could imagine for every song and lyric and church songs and rock songs, he knew it all. He could remember anything. And I loved his optimistic spirit despite all the challenges life had offered him. Because he was just from the East End of London, and he struggled to fit in at school, and so he was bullied in the neighborhood at times. And his family life was difficult. Things weren't easy. And so it caused some trauma in his life, and he held on tight to the things that were magical and good about his childhood. I remember being so sad when he told us that he remembered this little box of toys and everything that was in it the day they had to move out in the middle of the night. He didn't know why they had to move, and his mom had promised he'd never have to give up his toys. But when they fled in the night, probably because of an issue with their housing or her partner, his toys got left behind. And a lot of his childhood was attached to those memories of having to grow up too quickly and the world not really being fair. And I just remember thinking how much he needed heroes in his life. But not just the Marvel ones. Of course he loved the movies, and he could cheer along with any movie with the best of them. But it's not a really big surprise when you think about it, when he came with us to church. And of course it's an older church, so we had to get some helpers, and we were always late. We had to kind of carry him up the stairs and get him settled and get him in his pew, and he'd do his fist bumps for everyone because he loved to see everybody. He had weakening legs, but he had a strong heart, and he had a strong faith. And it just made me laugh every time we'd see him. You know, where Protestant churches are not maybe so excitable at times. Maybe here we are, but not every church is like here. And so there'd be a verse of scripture, or there'd be a song, and you'd hear him in the pews cheering, like, yeah, go Jesus. Like, he loved the stories, and he got so excited about whenever Jesus won something. You know, flipping tables was awesome, and healing people, it was awesome. He would get so fired up, and you couldn't help but laugh and say, like, why are we not getting fired up? You know, like, he just knew. He knew how exciting it was. It's this guy took charge and told people when things weren't fair, and he took care of people, right? And that's what Bill wanted, and it was so awesome seeing that through Bill's eyes. And it just reminded me that we have heroes in the movies, but to him, the other hero, the superhero that he also worshipped was the one in the Bible, and those stories were part of that amazing power as well. So it makes me wonder what superheroes have that we haven't got. Well, the one thing they tend to do is they're always shown to have one big power, like they really focus on something, and it's their way to conquer the evil or to save the downtrodden, and that's how they make things right in the world. And they always have confidence in this gift or this value and the way that they go about righting the wrongs that the world needs done. And the next slide is lovely Maya Angelou. And she's speaking about how we can find ways to not be normal and not blend in and try to find that spark or that gift that could be our superpower. And it brings to mind that little girl in our puppet video today, how she's been given permission to celebrate and to acknowledge her superpower of being fun and bright and having this awesome hair and celebrating the person she was made to be. Having the faith to embrace herself right down even to her awesome, bushy, pretty hair. And I know we're not all going to be able to leap over tall buildings, and I've never figured out how to get the web to come out of my wrist. It doesn't work. And we usually can't stop speeding trains. But we don't have to give up the temptation, the other things that might come to us. So we don't have to give in and follow the crowd, and that does take a bit of power sometimes. We don't have to keep up with the Joneses. And we don't have to turn the other way when we see people in our community or in our world who are suffering and hurting. And so it reminds me that faith reminds us to be strong even when it's not the popular thing to do, and not to dismiss our own self-doubt, to find the confidence that we were created to do something with our own unique superpowers. Because if you're always trying to be normal, you'll never know, and the world will never know how amazing you can be. And the next slide is from Jesus Christ Superstar, which is kind of like a superhero movie, or a stage production, I guess, when we get back to the stage. And if you've watched the movie, it really does show the struggles, the drama, and the excitement people had for his power and his teaching, but also the drama and the fear of the struggles he was fighting against, and the distractions and the pull of the evil. And for us too, we have those voices in our backgrounds and in the media, in our neighborhoods, the consumerism or the greed and the division and suspicion that's so easy to give into. And if he'd given in, it would have broken the connection to the divine and that loving relationship that could be at the center of all of us. But by relying on that inner strength and that confidence that's inside, that knowing what he's really made of, Jesus found a way to stand up to that bullying voice, to that version of Satan that was trying to take him down. Jesus knew who he is. He knew who he was because he also knew how to remember whose he was. He was God's. And so we go back to the mountaintop and think about how we have to dig deep sometimes when we find ourselves in this time of wilderness, which probably this year at Lent, even more than ever before, we can relate to the idea of being stuck somewhere wandering in the wilderness for 40 days or 40 weeks or 40 years. It won't be 40 years. It won't be 40 years, I promise. But Jesus, first of all, the Israelites, those people did find themselves wandering for 40 years in their own wilderness. And then Jesus has the parallel of his own 40 days and 40 nights in the wilderness. And so we're in that time too, in our own Lenten journey and our own world journey, I think, with trials in our lives and being tested by society's unfairness, by winter, by COVID. But just like Israel and like Jesus, we can feel the pressure and we can be tested by all these wilderness trials that come our way. But with that confidence and a little bit of strength and maybe a bit more faith, we can come out on the other side stronger in the purpose and stronger with our convictions and ready to take on whatever challenges life might have in store. So the next slide speaks to confidence. What is the test of confidence? So to me, I think it's about finding the strength to call on the gifts we already have, those morals, and not our weaknesses, and not to blend in, not to follow temptations blindly, not being seduced by the easy win. So it's not about thinking you're better than somebody else. It's just to realize that you have your own unique gifts and you should be confident in those because you're not made like anyone else. That is not the right slide. That's interesting. Okay, well, there is a slide about an awesome little girl. Yeah, there's the awesome little girl. Okay, we're back. That's all right. This girl is here to remind us that it's really easy in these human lives to feel like we're not enough and feel like we're too small and that we're lacking or that there's some emptiness inside that we just haven't figured out how to fill. But we don't have to worry about completing ourselves with the empty promises that life might bring us, because those things are just things usually. The idea of emptiness being filled by a new car or a new phone or a new spouse. We can find strength from that divine mystery that enters into our hearts and can fill that emptiness and help complete us. And it's not because that the love is erasing the struggles. That is not really how it works. But because the hardships will stay and the love will come alongside us. So that mystery, that love will help complete us and accompany us with those struggles. And that's how we can survive the storms and the wilderness chapters that we find ourselves in Lent and beyond. And that's where the strength can come from, in reminding us of the confidence that we picture that Jesus must have had when he was hot and tired and dry and delirious up on that mountain. How he found the way to say, no, I know where I need to be and I know how I need to live. And he used that superhero strength. He held on to his faith and found deep down some little bit of courage that he could withstand even the strongest temptations on the mountaintop. So my hope today, friends, is that we will all find that love that can fill us up and will give us superhuman hope and superhero love in the wilderness of life and Lent. Because we do need some superhero strength to get us through life's trials and temptations. And we all could use a little dose of superhero confidence that there is new life on the other side. May it be so.